Looks
Yep,
like we're live.
we're live.
Looks like we're live.
Yay!
We're
Um,
still alive. That's what
yeah,
we should be
We're
saying. We
still
are all
alive.
still alive.
yeah.
Here's to that.
As far as we know. So welcome everybody to another episode of the Cocktail Apocalypse, Happy Hour at the End of the World. I am Nick Mather, and I am joined, as usual, by the lovely Stephanie Boudet and the equally lovely Jeremy Anderson.
Lovely, lovely, lovely.
Yeah,
Thank you.
of course. How are you both doing today?
Oh, doing great.
Yeah.
Excited to be here
PG.
still.
Yes, yes, we're still here. I think
Yes.
that's the big news of today. We're
Yes.
still here.
Yeah, we survived the rapture that did not happen on Monday the 8th due to the eclipse, apparently.
Right?
Yeah.
Did anyone else release helium-filled blow-up dolls, or is it just me?
Yes, I know that reference. Yes. Yeah. I showed that in class once, and I don't know if that was a good idea or not. But,
It's always a good idea.
yeah, one of the intro scenes of from I think it was the first season of 6 Feet Under. Yeah, yeah, that was awesome. Well, I mean, in terms of rapture and whatnot, the thing that I started thinking about is maybe there never will be a rapture because this is the bad place.
Right. I've wondered that myself too. Maybe it already happened.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're stuck here.
Yep. Yep. Because this is the bad place. A lot of popular culture references this morning. There were also some earthquakes last week, I believe, around the eclipse. We had a major one in Taiwan. New Jersey got shaken up a little bit. And was there another one?
That's all I know. Somebody predicted one in Madrid, but I don't know if it ever happened.
Okay.
One of our commenters on an earlier episode mentioned the eclipse and the earthquake in Madrid is the end of the world. So, or it's
Okay.
the end of the world, but we're still here.
Okay, yeah. Or it's already happened, and
Right.
again, this is the bad place.
Well,
California did not fall into the ocean.
not yet.
Yeah, yet. Always have to say yet.
Soon.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So the other thing that was in the news was the hurricane report for 2024. And,
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to hear this.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. There were, how many was it? 23?
23 named storms, and 11 full-fledged hurricanes. And I saw on average is about 7 named hurricanes,
Wow.
and we have 11 here, and I think it's 15 named storms is on average, and we have 23. We've never had 23 before.
Oh my gosh.
There is apparently record warming of the ocean, so
Right.
this is not boding well.
No, it's not. And this is our topic for this week: is the environmental apocalypse. And I think front and center of this is climate change. And there are so many different aspects to this. There's not just one. It's the phrase that I like is that it is a wicked problem. And there are a couple of different approaches to this. And one of the things that we are all kind of coming from is that climate change is a reality. And if you don't believe in it, you can just bugger right on off and go read a book about it.
Yeah, your belief does not negate the facts.
Well, yeah, and it's really weird because, I think that there's a lot of rhetoric involved in the conversations, and apocalyptic language is part of that.
Right.
But so is how questions are framed. I was in a training for an online college, and the course was something like ethics and global ethics and whatnot. And one of the modules was for climate change. And there were other people in this training that were going to be teaching this class. And one of the professors had this discussion question for his students, which was, is climate change real just because the consensus of scientists say so? And I'm like, you're putting the cart before the horse there, pal, because they're saying that it's real because it is. It's not that there's it's not that the consensus makes it true. It's true,
Right.
It's like
What
but
does the evidence show? Yeah.
yeah. What I did is, and I'm going to ask both of you to kind of jump in here. First, I want to say something about apocalyptic rhetoric in environmental issues in general. And it has often been said that the beginning of this was with the publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring,
Right.
which I think was published in 1961, maybe 62, I think it was 61. And I've got a quote here, and this is something I wrote, but her text offered descriptions of lawns littered with the corpses of dead and dying birds that had been poisoned with DDT, planes spraying death-delivering chemicals above playgrounds, and an environment infused with lethal toxins. She detailed an emerging cancer epidemic that was the direct result of our technical advances, and by doing so, delivered a walloping blow to both the hubris of the chemical industry and the American way of life. And that's really when apocalyptic imagery kind of got into the narratives. And then we can flash forward to the end of the 60s. In 69, there was that massive oil spill in Santa Barbara that then led to the very first Earth Day. But the apocalyptic language, as narratives have been there, and it's been there from people who are concerned about the environment and people who aren't concerned and people who use it as justification for not doing anything at all.
Right.
And then we have, of course, global climate change. Now, what I did is I have all of this listed. I stole this from the table of contents from David Wallace Wells' The Uninhabitable Earth. And I thought that was a good place to kind of go through. And so first place to start is heat, global warming. And 2023 was the hottest year on record.
Yep. Every month for the last 10 months, we've set new global temperature records for the month. Some scientists are looking at that and saying that this is an acceleration of what they expected. A lot of people are shocked by it. It shouldn't be this hot, even if we have global warming and climate change.
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot of caution around that because we haven't seen it long enough to say if it's a blip, like because we hit an El Nino and now we're going into a La Nina really rapidly. So it's not that's not consensus yet, but I think a lot of people are extremely alarmed by that, considering how hot it's gotten.
Yeah, and in conjunction with this, a couple of statistics that I pulled, and this is the U.S., and I know that there were hotter places, but Phoenix, for example, and I have family living in the Phoenix area. They had 31 days of temperatures over 110.
Wow.
And Death Valley hit 128. And they had a record night temperature of 120.
Oh my gosh!
And that's something that is concerning, and that's happening elsewhere.
Yeah, they were showing the heat wave through China because of the humidity. It reached, I believe, they've hit the wet bulb index of 100% already, and it was causing condensation on everything. So you have that problem with the heat and the humidity, the water in the atmosphere, just creating this environment where you can't sweat to cool off. And that's what they're concerned about right now. It's not sustaining for a long period of time before it cools down again, but this wasn't supposed to happen this quickly.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
they were not predicting it.
Yeah. And that's one of the predictions of climate change is that there's going to be more moisture in the atmosphere.
Hmm.
And
Right.
it's going to be odd in the sense like, I just spent the past 19 years in California where most of that time there was a pretty significant drought. When I first moved there in, what was it, 2005, I think, or 2004,
Mhm.
that winter was a pretty wet winter, and then it was dry as bone for the most part until about 2 years ago when it started raining and raining pretty hard. And the predictions are that there are going to be these extremes where you
Right.
have, extreme wetness and then extreme drought. And
Mhm.
my guess is that California is probably going to be heading into another drought period.
Right.
And they were getting pretty bad because, and this is another topic, is, availability of water, availability of fresh water. Because what
Mhm.
happens is we're pumping out all the water from the aquifers. we're, we're losing both groundwater and surface water,
Mhm.
and especially like in California, what happens is the ground, if you have an extreme drought, and this would be for everywhere, that when it rains, the land can't absorb the water
Right.
because it's so dry. And so you get
Mhm.
all the runoff, and this is where you get the landslides. And when you
Mhm.
get all of that, the water, the fresh water that's available, isn't clean.
Yeah. I think they were also showing in California that in the past, the past year or so, maybe 18 months, Tulare Lake started
Mm.
coming back. It had disappeared 130 years ago, um, basically because they started to dry it out to farm the area, and now that whole area is being filled right back in,
Yeah.
um, because of all the wet moisture coming in from, I believe, the Pineapple Express, as they call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just been um,
Yeah.
so relentless there. They were also showing, I think it was like at the beginning of this year or the end of last year, the violent uh, waves coming in and destroying the property.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm. Mm.
I don't know if you remember that.
No.
Yeah, they were showing pictures of it, or news of it. I think it was a couple months ago, where it was just crashing into the buildings, and just destroying like apartments and such
Mm.
because it was so violent.
Mm. Yeah, and that's the waves there. That's from the oceans, right? Which is
Hmm. Oh yes.
a whole other thing, right? Because we're going to have rising ocean levels,
Right.
especially as land ice melts. Um,
Mhm.
we've got sea ice already, and that was part of to go back to the heat. The Arctic sea ice coverage was at a record low,
Yeah.
Hmm.
and the less sea ice coverage that to bounce the sunlight back out into the atmosphere,
Mhm.
the hotter the waters are going to become. Um,
Right.
and I just to say something else about water here, and we're just kind of like laying out the groundwork, I suppose, for all of
Right.
this.
The
Um,
waterwork.
yeah. Um, Someone needs to tell a joke somewhere in all this because this
I'll
is
do
all
my
pretty.
best.
Yeah, this is all pretty bad. But to go back to the runoff and the not clean water, that can actually have adverse effects for health because the
Mhm.
diseases are spread through water.
Right.
Hmm.
And that's one of the big questions as well is access to clean water. There
Mhm.
are places in the world, I follow Nepal quite a bit. There are places in Nepal they don't have the clean water, and people are dying from diarrhea And, the more diseases that we're going to put into the water, the more likely that's going to happen in other places. And California was draining the aquifers, and then you have places like, Coca-Cola and so on and so forth that are draining the fresh water out.
Yep.
Yeah, I just saw a story about this in Hawaii. They were saying that there is a freshwater emergency going on in Hawaii right now, and it began before the volcanic issues
Right.
where the fire started, and they said that all the fresh water was going to the tourists, and it was becoming more and more difficult for the locals to access fresh water. And just imagine that. That's a terrible thing to hear, that we value the tourist industry more than our local people.
Right.
But the fact that they don't have the fresh water is and it's polluted, is such a travesty going on there.
Yeah, and that, I think, along similar lines, there is definitely a question of environmental justice here for the people in Hawaii to have access to water. And we've seen this play out in other places in the States, with Flint, Michigan, for example, and the Dakota Access Pipeline, because that was a threat to the aquifers. And, the other thing to think about here is, with the importance of water, is that we use the water for our crops. Now, that lake in California, that's all in the Central Valley where we grow the crops, and that's an issue right there. If it's underwater, you can't grow the crops. But if you don't have fresh water, you can't water the crops. And livestock uses a tremendous amount of water. I know the old statistic was like one steer would require as much water that could float a super tanker.
Right.
And that's actually one of the reasons why one should limit their beef consumption, because it's so water intensive. And we use water
and polluting.
That's the other aspect of that. We can talk about cow farts if you want. But there's also the pollution that goes into the waterways, because they give them so many antibiotics and so on and so forth. And watersheds provide millions of jobs. And if they're flooded or gone, those jobs are gone. So there's a real economic aspect to this as well. And that's actually one of the things on the list, which we'll get to, is economic collapse, because that's a threat here. So we started with heat death. That's fresh water. The heat also, I think, we can connect droughts to that. And drought has a profound effect on whether or not we can grow crops and feed ourselves.
Right.
And at the same time, the oceans are warming. And not only are they warming, but they are becoming more acidic. Because the oceans trap the carbon dioxide. And they're reaching their tipping point. I remember once reading that the oceans have not been this acidic since like the days of the dinosaurs. And this leads to coral reef bleaching. And millions of people depend on coral reefs for their livelihood and to feed villages and communities. And then I also thought that we should mention, in terms of flooding, I don't know how many Americans are aware of this, but in 2022, a third of Pakistan was underwater. A third. It cost like $3 trillion worth of damages, of economic damage. And this was because of the monsoons. The monsoons, the rains were just heavier, and the Indus Valley flooded, and this is what we got. And we're going to start seeing more of this.
Right.
All right. Anyone have a joke before we move on to the
I do
next?
not at this point. I do not.
No, sorry.
I just think of
Can't
the
think of anything
Watchmen and
funny.
All right. Well,
the
that
Watchmen.
uh,
You're familiar with the Watchmen? It
mm-hmm,
was a short comic book series, and the comedian who laughed at the world
Mm-hmm.
because the world was a joke.
uh,
But yeah,
yeah. Well, all I
but,
can do right now, and that's the whole purpose of this, is take another drink.
right. Here we go.
I mean, what else are you going to do when the Earth's on fire?
Oh, this is fine. This is fine.
It's okay. Yeah, it's fine. The guy in the house with the coffee, it's fine. Everything's fine.
Right.
Um, let's see. Yes. So some of the statistics I've got with the ocean acidification, that in the past 200 years, the oceans have become 30% more acidic. And this is faster than any known change in ocean chemistry in the last 50 million years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is fine. This is
Yeah.
fine.
Well, and it's happening so fast that animals can't, sea life can't
Right.
adapt.
Right.
So the other thing that's happening is like shellfish. The shells are dissolving.
Yeah.
They can't grow the shells, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right.
And so,
Coral bleaching.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so this leads to one of the other elements that is part of all of this, and that is biodiversity loss, which is a really nice way of saying mass extinction.
Right.
Yep.
So I have some numbers here. These all come from the IUCN Red List. The IUCN Red List, that's the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Their Red List, which they keep up to date, is the most comprehensive scientific list of threatened species. And so just some of these statistics. Right now, of the known species, 44,000 species are threatened with extinction.
Mm-hmm.
41% of amphibians, 37% of sharks and rays, 28% of selected crustaceans, 26% of all mammals.
Wow.
And, I mean, this is over a quarter of mammals. And whenever I bring this up in class, I always feel compelled to say, and we're mammals. Do you think we're going to escape this? How do you think we're going to escape this? 21% of reptiles, so a fifth of all reptiles. 36% of coral reefs. And then they also look at plant life as well. So, for example, 34% of the conifers. And the, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, the cycads, these are, I think, the palm trees, 70% are threatened.
Yeah. Yeah, I watched the 60 Minutes episode on, and this was, I think, January 1st, 2023. They did it on the sixth mass extinction.
Mm-hmm.
And mass extinction is anything that is 75% or more of of the biodiversity on the planet. And we're looking at globally at a loss of 69% already of the species. And when you look at that, you think, oh my God, that's horrific. But we're close. We're very close to actually being at that 75%. And I would say, it's already here because we're still heating up. We're still
Right.
we're still expanding human access to places on Earth. 70% of the world is filled with people. With or at least expansion of resources that we use.
Right.
So yeah, it's we're reaching that. We've already reached overshoot, I believe.
Right.
That was just a couple of years ago, where we are now using, I think it's something like 175% of the Earth's resources can't be replenished at this
Right.
point.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
you think about that, and the fact that we're still growing, we're still on this capitalist model of infinite growth. And some companies are cutting back, and some are trying to change how the way that they do business, but we're still actually using more resources than we have to replenish. I think we need
Right.
5 Earths in
Yeah.
order to compensate for the average American lifestyle,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's for Americans. So, and we hit our overshoot day sometime usually around March or April, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But we have, what is it, like 5% of the world's population, yet we use over 20% of the world's resources.
Mm-hmm.
And that also is a issue of social justice because
Mm-hmm.
it's, the Western industrialized countries are the ones that kind of benefit from climate change. They benefit from all this
Right.
resource use. And those, that suffer from it are the countries that are less
Mm-hmm.
industrialized, less
Right.
developed. And so that's a massive difference, that we're using all their resources. And then there are the questions of, well, can't they develop somehow? How can we help them? And this whole capitalist model is kind of part of the problem, if not the main problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we can talk about that a little bit more here, I think, because the question is, why is all this happening? And it's one thing to say, well, it's humans.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Right.
doing this. And yeah, but what's driving us?
Mm-hmm.
What's kind of behind all of that? Is it just this idea of endless growth of the economy? Or is there something else? Is there a kind of worldview that is behind all of this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely see a worldview attached to it.
Mm.
Um, it's part of it is like not too different from the prosperity gospel, right? If you're doing well, um, that's because God wants you to do well,
Mm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know. And those who aren't doing well, they must be doing something wrong.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, that's part of it, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Another part of it, I think, is once you have something and it's in abundance for you and you have all these conveniences, you could turn on your tap and get some water. You have delivery from Amazon whenever you want. You have all these conveniences. People don't easily give up what they have.
Mm.
Right.
Once you have it, it's like to take it away, that's going to be a fight.
Yep.
Mm.
And I don't foresee people willingly saying, "Oh, okay, I'll give this up if it means that the Earth will be better off for it, and other
Right.
people in other areas will be better off for it." Um, I don't see that happening. Just that willing, voluntarily saying, "Okay, here you go." I
Right.
think some people do that. Certainly, some
Mm-hmm.
people do that, but most don't,
Yeah.
because now
Right.
it's a right. Now this is mine.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep. And part of it has to do with, I think, in cultural anthropology, they talk about the cultures in general, and some of them are very individualistic, and some are very community focused, and there's obviously a spectrum in between. And
mhm,
especially here in the United States, we're individualistically focused. We do not think about other people. I'm
mhm,
speaking in general. Obviously, there are clearly Americans that do think about other people, but that that radiates out from our central government to everything else. Like,
Mm.
we are Americans. This is mine. We get it, and we don't care about other people because we focus on ourselves, not on the rest of the world or the rest of the community. So yeah,
yep,
there's a worldview behind this as well, and I think part of it is culturally dependent because there are other cultures where it is more community focused. Like Japan, for
mhm,
instance, tends to be more community focused. So Yuko and I, my wife is Japanese, and we have this conversation a lot. Why don't you think about other people? I'm like, Oh, good point.
Hmm. Yeah, there's, I think, a couple of things with this that I kind of want to dig into here, and I think that's an outstanding point, Jeremy. That there, not all cultures think the same way. And
Hmm.
Steph, you mentioned, that old Puritan work ethic, but I think what's even behind even more of that is the notion, this worldview of a materialistic worldview.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I always kind of take that to the birth of modern philosophy with Rene Descartes, and also the birth of modern science, where, for Descartes, he makes this radical division
Mm-hmm.
between mind and matter.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
only humans have mind, according to him. Animals, no
Mm.
mind. The natural world, no mind, no soul, nothing like that. It's just dead stuff that we can use however we want
Right.
to
Right.
support. And, before that, there was a view that the whole world and the whole universe is alive.
Right.
That there's a spirit, maybe even a consciousness to it all.
Mm-hmm.
And we certainly don't see trees as, we might recognize them as living beings, but we certainly don't recognize them as having spirit or even
Right.
consciousness. And there are some challenges to these notions,
Hmm.
necessary challenges. But I don't think that you can have an extractive economy like we have if you see the world and everything on it as having spirit or being alive.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, and it's always interesting because, yes, we are very self centered, especially in the United States.
Hmm.
What I found interesting was reading Alexis de Tocqueville, his Democracy in America, which was published, I think, in like 1820. And he was a French kind of sociologist, and that may be before the term was even invented, who traveled in the United States, this new United States. And one of the things that he was really fascinated by was this kind of self-interest
Mm.
that was dominant everywhere. And the self-interest, what people kept telling him was, oh, well, yeah, it's self-interest, but it's self-interest properly understood. But what they meant by that, and I get this, is the idea was, yeah, I want to follow my self-interest, but self-interest understood is still this idea that I can only benefit if the community I live in benefits,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right.
right? And so there is if I want to follow my self interest, that's fine, but I have to recognize that my self interest are not divorced from the community or
Right.
the land
Right.
that I exist in,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yep.
But even then, people were like, yeah, this is just a bunch of trees. There's no, like, I don't care. Let's just chop them
Right.
all down. Because there really wasn't any kind of ecology at that point,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Yeah, like the idea that something can have intrinsic value in and of itself,
Right.
divorce any human on the planet
Mm-hmm.
is just not heard of.
Yeah.
You
Hmm.
know, in that mindset, it's like no, it's all utilitarian. It's all
Yeah.
there. It has only useful value
Mm-hmm.
if we could do something with it.
Right.
Um,
And also in the short term, if it has value in the short term or the immediate term. I mean,
mhm.
we used to have huge forests in the United States until the loggers came through and cut whole swaths of them down without replacing.
Yeah.
I mean, if they thought maybe 50, 60 years in the future, well, we're probably going to need more trees at some point. Let's replant as we go through here. It would have been a different mentality and a different outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, I've read that at the very beginning, when the colonization process first started, that the almost the entire continent was covered in trees.
Mm-hmm.
There were descriptions of like a squirrel could jump up on a tree on the East Coast and just like bounce on all the limbs all the way to the West Coast, without ever having to stop, without ever having to touch ground. And yeah, we cut it all down for resources. And I would also argue here, and I think that it's important what you brought up, Steph, in terms of the Protestant ethic, is in conjunction with this, is I see Christianity as being one of the most individualistic traditions that there is, because it's based on this like personal relationship with the God, with the divinity, and it's all about your immortal soul. And I always point out, I had a friend once who I won't go into all the details, but had converted, apparently had a drinking issue, and then all of a sudden found Jesus, and then after that everything was like Jesus this, Jesus that. And I remember them posting once on Facebook about how they had gone out from work and their car wouldn't start. And they needed to get home. They lived like 30 miles away. And so they posted, I need help. I need someone to pick me up. And, then they're like, and I'm praying. And then someone's like, oh yeah, I can pick you up. And they're like, thank you, God. Thank you for answering my question, my call. And I'm like, so God can actually help you get a ride home from work. But how many million children are dying of starvation in Africa right now?
Yeah, that's, oh my God.
It's not just individualistic, it's narcissistic.
Right, exactly. And that may be a whole nother subject if we want to go into the Christian apocalypse of some sort, but,
Yeah, I guess that the entire idea of salvation becomes very, in Christianity, becomes very narcissistic. When you really look at that ideal, it's I'm saved, and because the grace of God, and it's okay, but what about the rest of the world? What about just being good to the earth, or just being mindful,
or even working in their own paradigm? What about children born that have leukemia within a couple of years? What did they do? How do they get saved? Why isn't God stepping in to solve this problem? But he is he's helping you find your car keys.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. There's that aspect of it. But if we look at the environment, and look at Christianity in terms of that, is there an intrinsic problem with God, in Genesis, granting Adam and Eve the dominion over all of the land, and it's in the stewardship of it.
Right.
And there's different ways to look at that, but Christianity does have an environmentalist movement based upon Genesis. But is there an intrinsic problem with humans being separated as something different? And given that dominion over the earth, that I don't think really exists too much in other faiths.
Right.
They are more in terms of being a part of it all, and in the Abrahamic religions, there's more of a dominion. So I think that in and of itself creates a separation and a problem.
It's more of a vertical morality rather than a horizontal. Right.
Rather than a web.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. A couple of things about that. One, I just wanted to mention, and I'm looking here. I'm trying to pull something up. Hopefully, I'm not screwing up our live stream. I don't think I are.
No, you're not.
I am. But with what you were just saying in terms of the dominion idea, it was in 1967 that the UCLA historian Lynn White Jr. published a very influential article called "The Roots of Our Ecological Crises," and in that he pointed his finger at Genesis, especially Genesis 1, and then later with in the Noah story, it's kind of repeated of this idea that humans should have dominion. And he's like, yeah, that's the problem right there. And a lot of religious organizations then began to push back, and they're like, no, 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 no. But we also have this tradition of stewardship, which is well and fine, I suppose.
Right.
But there are some other elements to it. I find that, yeah, this problem of dominion, that is a problem, but there are some other things. One is the idea of wilderness itself, because wilderness begins to have moral connotations.
Right.
And, it's the place where demons live,
Of course.
and that if you go out into wilderness, you can likely become all confused and disordered. That's becoming wild, right? So you go out into the wilderness and romp and stomp and gnash your terrible teeth with all the other wild things, wearing your wolf suit, if you will. And this is what I was looking for. So hold on here. There's and I hope I get it. This is I think it's Mark Stoll is the author, and this is Capitalism, Puritanism, and Colonialism. I know I'm slaughtering that title. I'll put the correct title in the show notes in a comment below. But what he does is he looks at how Christianity, especially going all the way back to the colonial Puritanism, informs both the exploitation of nature and the preservation of nature. And so the first one I've got, he sets these up as syllogisms. And so the first one goes back to that Puritan work ethic. And what it is if idleness is a sin, then work is blessed. Right? If work is blessed and godly, then production is sanctified. Productiveness is sanctified. If production is sanctified, then resource exploitation is a religious duty.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Okay, but then that's
Okay.
that's
Right.
justification for the exploitation. But now let's
Right.
look at the justification for preservation,
Mm-hmm.
because this was the other idea, is that God's work can be seen in creation.
Right.
Right. So it says if God's work can be seen in creation, then creation is an abode of the spiritual. If creation is an abode of the spiritual, then nature teaches piety and virtue. If nature teaches piety and virtue to humanity, then exploitation for profit is desecration and a sin. So
Yeah, so there's some mixed signals going on there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's important to keep in mind that, aside from Lynn White Jr., that the environmental movement in the United States really has religious foundations to it. In that, it's a different vision, and this is a different vision than what de Tocqueville recognized, because what he would hear from people is like, yeah, it's just a tree. It has no, I can cut it down. I don't care. But, it was later with the Transcendentalists, with Ralph Waldo Emerson and then with Thoreau, that's kind of the heart of it, that they saw the sacred within nature. But and there were precedents for that.
Right. Slightly tangential.
Yeah.
The rapture.
Yes.
I just saw a little discussion about it where the whole idea of the rapture didn't come out until like the 1860s with Darby. And
Right.
up until that point, so the idea of the rapture is that good Christians will be taken up into heaven, and then everything will happen on earth, and these good Christians will be up in heaven, just get to watch all the badness happen. But prior to that, and even if you go back and read the original text in the original language, it talks about it's more of coming out to meet Jesus and coming back with him. So is there some sort of tie-in with that, with the evolution, or not the evolution, but the environmental differences? I mean, if you're going to be raptured up into the heaven and you get to watch everything fall apart on the earth, is there any reason to care for the earth? Versus those that think that are going to be coming back and we're going to have to live amongst this with everyone else, is there some care that needs to be taken?
Yeah, you are actually describing the premillennial and the postmillennial dilemma
Okay.
in fundamentalist Christianity. The premillennialists really feel that there is no reason at all to care about the earth because it's all doomed.
Okay. Okay.
And it's just a material thing anyway. Your heavenly reward is what you should be focused on.
Right. Right.
So the rapture in the premillennials, they're taken before all, the shitstorm happens, right?
Right.
So yeah, no. In fact, this was an issue during the Reagan administration. The rapture is an invention of Hal Lindsey.
Okay.
It did not. No one registered that before he made it up in the late Great Planet Earth.
Okay.
All right. It may have appeared a little bit earlier, but it's really defined in the late Great Planet Earth.
Okay.
And Hal Lindsey was a part of Reagan's cabinet, really. I mean, he was an unofficial part of it, but he was a part of it. And that was the whole idea, is that we don't need to prepare and be mindful of the environment because Jesus is coming back soon and it doesn't really matter. Right. And then God will take care of all of this. And the post-millennialists in evangelical Christianity were, no, we can actually bring about a heaven on earth, but we ourselves have to be the ones to make this happen. We have to, this is where you got like the abolitionist movement, I can't think of the word, anti-liquor movement.
Oh yeah,
prohibitionist.
Yep.
Prohibitionist. Sorry, brain wouldn't work. But the prohibitionist movement. All of these movements were around the idea that we have to bring in heaven on earth, and then Jesus will come back and say you did a good job. But we have to do it. So there's this big dilemma between those two movements, and really after the Civil War, the premillennialists kind of won that because it was just this devastating period and just a lot of pessimism around everything. And then World War II brought that back into that movement, reinforced that idea. It's really profound even today, the premillennialist idea that there's just nothing to be done. We got to wait for God to come back and take care of all of this because
right. And there's no reason to, because God's going to take care of it.
Yeah, I just to add on to that, and I've got something here which I don't know if you know about this one, Steph, but the I think it's the postmillennialists gave rise to what's referred to as the social gospel. That we need to set the conditions on earth first before Jesus can return. And the social gospel was behind prohibition, right? Which is its bad part. But there was also an emphasis on helping the poor and trying to make the world a better place.
Right.
And it was referred to as a Christian socialism. And one of the main thinkers of this was Walter Rauschenbusch. and he wrote a book. And so I would actually like push back a little bit about that the premillennials or the postmillennial, I get all confused with that, but that they won because Rauschenbusch's book about the social gospel was the best-selling book for 3 years in the United States. And what happened was, and again, this was after World War II, that there was this pushback of because, they also were very influential with the creation of the New Deal. Because a lot of these social gospel ideas got put into the New Deal, and you had business who always hated the New Deal. And after World War II, that's when you started seeing this merging of the sort of conservative Christian movement and business. And the idea was that if we can get people focused on cultural wedge issues, then they will vote for politicians who claim to support those issues.
Right.
So and who knows whether the politicians actually cared, but the first wedge issue was prayer in public school. And it's like, okay, so we're going to run all these candidates that want to get prayer back in the school and whatnot, but really their main goal is to tear apart the New Deal. And then the next wedge issue was abortion. And we still see this playing out.
Yep.
Yeah, so I would argue that you just made my point that the premillennials won out in the end.
In the end,
there's no doubt that there was this seesaw during after the Civil War. There was a lot of pessimism. Then we hit a depression, and then we go into the 20th century, and after World War II, I think there was more optimism. Because the United States comes out of its isolation, and it's actually doing pretty well for a while.
Right.
But almost immediately after FDR and the New Deal, you get attacks on it, and we're going right back into this premillennial idea in Christianity of pessimism or if not pessimism of ideas of, the earth, all, the social programs. These things are not going to help us.
Right.
And I think what comes out of that is really a more of that individualism and American spirit that we've had since the beginning. It's like, it's that prosperity gospel of what's happening for me versus what's happening for all of us.
Yeah. No, the only thing I was pushing back against is I thought that it was the not quite right after the Civil War, but I can see that was like the beginning of. But you're absolutely right that one group did seem to win. Here's the thing that I've got here in terms of fundamentalism and the fundamentalist movement. Now, I've got this, and I think that there was a little bit of history before this, but that fundamentalism technically began in like 1910 at the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. And the Bible Institute of Los Angeles was subsidized by Lyman Stewart, who was the president of the Union Oil Company of California.
I did not know that.
I wouldn't say it began there. I would say it was popularized there.
It had a background. Yeah, definitely there was a background with the Princeton theology and all of that. Yeah, but I think that this is where, because it was the Institute that published and distributed the fundamentals.
Right.
And so there was a oil interest connection right at the beginning.
Yeah, and I'm sure they jumped on a lot of those ideals that had come out before because they were extremely useful for the narrative.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What would be interesting to know is, are oil interests still behind a lot of the fundamentalist
Yeah.
thinking and movement?
Well, it's certainly behind the denialism of climate
Right.
Yeah.
climate
Right.
change.
Yeah.
Even though back in the 1970s when we had the gas crisis,
Mm-hmm.
there were gas companies, oil companies that were moving towards sustainability. I remember seeing commercials about that on TV, where like we want to move forward to blah 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 to help sustain our world so this crisis never happens again. So that at least they're playing lip service to what was going on, even if they didn't back it. But something changed up beyond that point,
Yeah. What changed was the election of Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because that saw the increase of political influence by the Christian right
Yeah.
with
Yeah,
Reagan.
yeah.
And if you remember, because I'm wicked old, I kind of remember the energy crisis. My elementary school closed down for like a month because they could not afford to pay the heating bills. One winter, and it was also a winter we had a blizzard, and then I had chicken pox. It was a weird winter, but I remember there was that, and then when Reagan got elected, gas prices just plummeted.
Yeah.
I remember paying like 50-60 cents a gallon of gas, I think. And I think Steph has already mentioned the Reagan and Hal Lindsey, but also Reagan's Secretary of the Interior was James Watts, and he famously, while speaking to Congress, had said that and this is like a paraphrase, that he didn't know to what extent we should focus on our conservation efforts because we just don't know exactly when Jesus is going to come back.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Obviously expected it soon.
There certainly was a lack of separation of church and state there.
Yep.
A lot of people either don't remember or just didn't know about.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man, I need a drink. This may be a good place to stop and play Jeremy's drink recipe for the perfect storm, because that's what this is. This is a perfect storm.
For clarification, this is not my recipe. This is the Kraken Rum's recipe. I just stole it.
Okay, good. Thief. Let's see if I can get this going right.
Let's make the perfect storm from Kraken Rum. Hi, I'm Jer. Welcome to Kill Devil, where we focus on rum and cocktails. Today we are going to make the perfect storm from the Kraken Rum. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning to the channel, welcome back. In either case, I hope you enjoy this drink. I'm not a professional bartender. I used to work in a dive bar, but I spent more time drinking in a dive bar, so I have a fondness for really simple drinks. And the perfect storm is one of those really simple drinks. The perfect storm is Kraken Rum's version of a safe harbor. A safe harbor is any rum drink that uses rum and ginger beer, commonly referred to as Dark and Stormies. However, Dark and Stormy is trademarked by Gosling's Rum, so professionally we cannot call it a Dark and Stormy unless we use Gosling's Rum. And so the Kraken called theirs a perfect storm. If you'd like to know more about that history, I will link the videos down below to my safe harbor video and the Gosling's Dark and Stormy video. A note on the rum. This is the Kraken's perfect storm. If you're not using the Kraken's black spiced rum, then you are not really making their perfect storm. You may be making a great safe harbor, but it's not a perfect storm. We are going to make this drink in the glass, and the Kraken uses parts instead of ounces, so that means if it's a really big glass, you can make a really big drink as long as you keep the parts the same. You just have to adjust your units. I'm using a highball with 8 ounces in it, so I'm going to be using ounces. I'm going to start by adding ice to my glass. One more. Or 2. Then I'm going to get my ginger beer. And 3 parts ginger beer to 1 part rum, so I'm going to put about 6 ounces of the ginger beer in the bottom of the glass. 6 ounces is about something metrics. I'll put it in the subtitles down below. How many ounces in this? Oh, 12. So it should be half of the bottle. It's going to be less than that because of the ice. But you'll have to forgive me, Kraken, for screwing up your proportions. Let that settle a little bit. A little more. That's not halfish. Oh well. Then, one part of the rum, one part is going to be about 2 ounces. Let's see if I can get 2 ounces in there. And we're going to try to float this on top. Oh, I poured too slow and it ran down the side of my jigger, which will benefit our proportions, get us back in line. We could have put a little bit more ginger beer in there. Oh, wow. Garnish. The official garnish for this is a lime wheel twist. And I'd never done one before, and I wasn't going to try doing it on camera. But I cut it, and I twisted it, and I put this skewer through it, and it made a little S, which is kind of nice. So I'm going to put that right there. And I'm going to add a straw. And my garnish is going to sink because of the ice. There we go. I'll do it that way. And there you have it. Perfect Storm from the Kraken Rum. Drink with good spirits. You may want to mix it, otherwise you're just going to get ginger beer and then black spiced rum. Up to you. Cheers. This may be the fanciest garnish I've ever made. So the question of the day is, what is your fanciest garnish? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd like to improve my skills by trying something more challenging. Note there are ways to support the channel if you're so inclined. I do have t-shirts available. If you want one, you can have one. All you have to do is contact me through one of those social media links down below and we'll figure out a way for you to get one. And while you're at the social media link, you might as well follow me on one of those. Finally, if you made it this far, give me a thumbs up, give me a subscribe if you enjoy what I'm doing here, and so you don't miss out on any more Kraken rums. Or based drinks. Kraken rum based drinks. Cheers.
Awesome. Now I want to make that. I should have had that. I love ginger beer.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between that and like a mule? Is the difference between the mule the cup it's made in?
Partially, yes. And that's a very good question. I'm going to have to think about that actually, because there is the Moscow mule, which is vodka. There's the Jamaican mule, which is rum. But then there's the Safe Harbor, which is ginger beer and rum. Cocktail names in general are kind of messed up, and there's a lot of overlap and inconsistency. So, yeah, I'm going to have to look that up.
Yeah. Well, we humans are not consistent. It's not a necessarily inherent human trait. So anyway, where were we? The end of the world. Yeah, Reagan. Well, you know, I need to do a video of this because very young, I was like 12 or 13 when Reagan got elected. And I still have this journal that when I was writing at that point, I think at that time I was maybe 13, that the day of his inauguration in my journal, I wrote that it was the apocalypse, that it was the end of the world in big, bold letters. And it was like, if I was 13 and I could figure that out, why couldn't everyone else?
You're too smart.
I guess. But, you know, I think that Reaganomics is important to consider with our climate change and environmental apocalypse, in the sense that, you know, Reaganomics, the whole point was to eradicate as much governmental intervention and regulation as possible.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, one of the things that I think might bring this full circle, there's a new denialism.
Yeah.
The old denialism was that climate change was not happening at all.
Right.
Right.
And amongst the same people, the same groups, there's the new denialism is, okay, climate change is happening. They still maybe not be saying it's because of people, but
Right.
it's,
Right.
we can't do anything about it. It is out of
Right.
our control. There's nothing that
Right.
can be done. And that
Right.
was very much the Reagan administration
Right.
of the time
Mhm.
is Jesus is coming back. So we don't need to make environmental concerns our business.
Yeah.
Because, and that's exactly what they thought back then, and it's come back now.
Yeah.
It's like we can't deny that it's happening anymore, but we can't deny that we can do anything about it, because after all, it's gonna, mess up business. We're all doomed, but it's gonna mess up business.
Yeah. Well, what I find interesting is, and I agree with this 100%, that climate change, global warming, whatever you want to call it, at its heart, the cause is there's a moral issue here. But I think it's like different visions of morality.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of my favorite quotes of all time, I think, was after Hurricane Katrina, because climate change says that, hurricanes are going to be far worse, far more
Right.
damaging. We already talked about how there are going to be more named hurricanes. But this is like one of my all-time favorite quotes, and it's by, that sage Pat Robertson of the 700 Club after Hurricane Katrina. And this is, as I have stated repeatedly on the 700 Club, Hurricane Katrina occurred because New Orleans is the epicenter of sinful jazz music in America.
Jazz music. Oh my gosh.
I just have to say, I used to watch Pat in the 700 Club for kicks and giggles.
Yeah.
I have to, but oh my God, jazz! How long has jazz been around? It's just
Well, it's a little bit racist because jazz
Yeah,
is
it's
kind of
completely
associated.
racist.
right.
Right.
Well, there's that too. But
Yeah, we should do an episode of some of these, because we're only doing like one a month, and we've got our list for this year. But we actually should do a whole episode where we look at some of these figures, because my mom loved Pat Robertson. I hate to admit it, but she loved Pat Robertson. She loved the 700 Club. She liked Jim and Tammy Baker, although I will come to the defense of Tammy Faye. But she was an ally to the LGBTQ folks.
Yes, she was. She was.
She actually was okay. Jim, not so much. My guilty pleasure was, and I would usually be, several beers into it, Jack Van Impe. I would watch Jack Van Impe and his lovely wife Rexella.
that's right. That's right. I remember that
That
one too.
is a blast from the past. I haven't thought of that in so long.
Yeah, he was a lot of fun. The Living Bible. I recorded him once, and then I went and checked all the biblical passages that he was like quoting, and over half of them were just nonsense. Anyway, that's a diversion.
Right. So the world is going to burn. That's kind of what we've discovered. It has its roots in Christianity and capitalism.
Yeah. Well, I think the big question. Oh, go ahead, Steph.
Can I just bring up a quote from Leviticus?
Yeah,
Because
please.
we have a lot of very ardent Leviticus supporters out there. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 23 through 24 states, "The land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, and you are but aliens and my tenants. Throughout the country that you hold as a possession, you must provide for the redemption of the land." I just wanted to bring that out, because that, if we're going to use Leviticus to say you can't have tattoos and that you can hold slaves and all those other things, Leviticus is clearly stating here that the land isn't yours. You cannot, you can hold it for a little bit, but you got to give it back.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think land consumption and the buying and selling of it as a commodity, where you sit on it and you hold it forever and no one else can use it but you for all of its resources, That's something that we need to discuss in terms of the religious values that we hold.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which comes back to the whole idea that a lot of these people are reading what they want to read, not what's really there. I mean, there's a
Mhm.
lot of this. Yeah, never mind. Moving
Yeah,
on.
that's where we need to be, and I think that, and this is part of my background, is my educational background, is that what we're facing is going to require a religious response, and we can look at this as, like a very generalized view. If you want to kind of step back and look at religion and the etymology of religion, which is to rebind or reconnect. Often, the question is always, well, rebind or reconnect with what? Well, God, right? But I'm like, no, the earth. And I think that there's interesting changes happening.
Mm.
And because we already see the religious traditions are, especially Christianity is undergoing something profound. And so, especially in the United States, the fastest growing demographic are people who identify as religious, spiritual but not religious. And one of the things that they tend to focus on is connection to the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is Lynn White Jr. wrote about this in 1967. That he said, and again, this is a paraphrase, that one of the greatest psychic wounds that humanity has ever experienced was the death of all the pagan traditions.
Yes, I 100% agree with that, and I think we're seeing a revival, a huge revival in people going towards more of the old pagan beliefs,
Mm.
and of course, so much of it was eradicated that they're kind of reconstructing it. It's more neo-paganism rather
Mm.
than, a really an a rebirth of the old ways, because I also don't think you can really do that.
Right.
This is not the same place that it was 1,000 years ago, right? So, um, yeah, I think what McKenna called the archaic revival, we're seeing a lot of that. People
Yeah.
really focusing on the earth and that type of spirituality that's more geared not towards the heavens, but the right here, the right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's saying, it's interesting because when I cover this in classes and in a basic discussion about religion in general, what does religion mean? I often will connect it to this sense of awe.
Mm.
And I will always ask students, when's the last time that you felt the sense of awe? And, and I'm not talking about, like something, oh, that's super awesome. But, chin on the floor, mouth open, awe.
Mm-hmm.
And like 95% of the times, it's like, oh, yeah, that's when I was out camping or I was out in this natural environment. That's when we get that sense of awe. And then there's always the one, the last Avengers movie. And
Yeah, I'll say that the last time I really experienced that in terms of a wow, oh my, wordless moment, was when I was up in the Sandias,
mm,
near Albuquerque. It was such a beautiful, amazing moment, and it's just stuck with me. It's some years ago, but yeah, I think most of us feel that sort of amazingness when we're out in nature.
mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a spiritual aspect to it. And I think that the spiritual aspect is something that's necessary in terms of what can we do? This is a all hands on deck moment.
Right.
And we need the religious traditions. We need, their insights into, and how we can, how they can speak to their congregations,
Hmm.
about this. Um, but it seems like there has to be kind of a religious response, a
Right.
spiritual response.
Hmm. Yeah.
I really do think there is one amongst the environmental movement.
Mm.
You know, I, whether it's in neo-paganism or one of the Eastern traditions, or even Christianity and Islam and Judaism, I do feel that we are seeing a religious response to the environmental crisis.
Mm.
Um,
It's just unfortunate some of the religious responses. Well, let it all burn. God will fix it later.
Well, that's the Southern Baptist Convention. But otherwise, not all traditions are apocalyptic or let it all burn.
Right.
We
Right.
have, I think one of the best examples is Pope Francis. And I
Hmm.
certainly
Hmm.
don't agree with everything that Pope Francis says, but I'm right on board with him in terms of environmental issues.
Right.
And one of the things that is, because he comes out of a liberation theology perspective, which
Hmm.
recognizes that the environment and issues of poverty are connected.
Yeah.
And one of the books, this is something I've been personally thinking about quite a bit lately, and want to do some more work with this. But one of the major influences on Francis was Leonardo Boff's "Cry the Earth, Cry the Poor."
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that Boff talks about at the very end, and this is, in a way, this is very hermetic, and it's hermetic in the sense of as above, so below, but as within, so without.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
my starting point is always what we see going on in the natural world is a reflection of humanity's soul, humanity's collective soul, as within, so without. And so if
mhm.
we want to fix what's going on outside, this environmental apocalypse that we find ourselves in, we have to fix ourselves.
Mhm.
And Boff talks about a inner ecology. Now he doesn't go into a lot of depth about that, but that makes sense that one of the things that we have to do in order to fix all of this is not just try to recreate a new paradigm or new systems, but we have to fix ourselves.
Yeah, that's the great work, right? In
Yeah,
Hermeticism, is that
yeah,
you work on yourself,
yeah,
Right.
um, and
Right.
and it's uh, that work with the self that leads to others
yeah.
working with themselves, and that sort of works like a domino, right?
Hmm.
You can't fix the world if you have nothing to do with trying to fix the issues with yourself. You
Yeah.
know,
Right.
that's
And
the
how
alchemical balance.
right, and this comes back to the whole idea of the individual versus the community. Part of the problem is that we have these strict dichotomies, right? It's either the individual or the community, but what you're talking about is a merger of the two. They're
Mm-hmm.
both
Hmm.
and rather than either or. And I think that's a big problem we have with the environmental issues as well, is that we think it's the world or it's us, but it's not. We are the world. There's a little song that goes with it, I'm sure, but you know what I mean, right?
Yes,
Yeah. No,
yes. Go ahead.
no, I'm just gonna say that now that's stuck in my head.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
We are the
Jeremy.
yeah.
Um,
I'll try to
but
focus on
yeah,
the Cindy Lauper part.
but yeah. I mean, there is that idea. I believe 100%, Jeremy, that we have this either or idea,
Hmm.
and no, it really can be both. We really can look to ourselves, and we should look to ourselves, and then the environment, or the world as a whole, or
Hmm.
our communities, and then the communities to the world. Um, it's not. I don't think that that great of a reach to think that we can look to both of us, just
Right.
ourselves and the community.
Hmm.
Yeah. I'm jotting down notes here. This idea of the great work, that was taken up by I never know how to describe him as a theologian, an ecologian, but Thomas Berry. That's actually one of the title of one of his works is the great work. He's like, this is what we need to do. But I also think that what's important is even going back to the story that we tell about how all of this came to be. And Thomas Berry wrote several books with the cosmologist Brian Swim. And I happen to know Brian, and Brian is a force of nature. And it is the stories that we tell about creation, in a sense, because the biblical stories of creation, we get this idea of dominion, which is problematic. And then, from a scientific perspective, we have the Big Bang, which tells us that all of this just happened somehow. It's a big mystery. But after this initial explosion of all matter, science is really good at telling us, what's going to happen next and everything. But there's this division. There's a meaninglessness to that story. And what Thomas Berry and Brian Swim try to do is reconnect humanity to the story and to maybe make the story a little bit more soulful, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because there is a mystery and we're part of that mystery.
Yeah.
Yeah. And where do we go with Hermeticism? Consciousness.
Yeah.
The idea that all is mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that we're connected into some greater consciousness. We're a part of that. That what, and it goes in here with as within, so without, right? If we are toxic and we are, not whole ourselves, then what can we expect the world to look like?
Yeah.
Right.
But a mess. And that to me ties us in to, because this is a direct mirror of our souls. If the world is out of balance and it is creating massive hurricanes and, there's pollution all over the place and people are dying of record high cancer rates and, pulmonary issues, then, that's a trend that is showing there's something wrong with us.
Right.
Because we're not focused on making that better.
Mm-hmm.
If we focused on making it better as, a collective, we'd make it better.
Yeah.
Right.
And we can't do that until we ourselves as individuals are whole.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the solution to the climate crisis is that we have to work on ourselves. We have to work on ourselves. And, I also want to add to that is, one of the things that it's difficult for, I think, a lot of people to grasp onto, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about this division, this duality between mind and body. Is we have to get over that body and spirit are one, because it's that duality that sees them as separate, where it's like, well, I don't really have to care because when I die, I'm going to have eternal existence in this other realm or something. And it's like, but no, body and soul are one thing. And we have to fix that. And I think that, I have moments of great pessimism. I don't honestly think that we can fix the crises that we have. I think that all that we can do is move through it.
Right. And I think we talked a little bit privately about hope.
Mm,
I mean, what is hope? I mean, when I look at what's going on, there's nothing I can do
right.
in a way. Is there a reason to hope
I
as far
think
as a feeling goes?
I think there is, but I think that and that's the issue, right? That so many of us feel so overwhelmed
Hmm.
by just what is happening. But I also kind of want to push back against that and say, you know, we each have power. And a statistic that I read recently is like it just takes like 3% of a population to
Mm.
affect massive change. And, the 97%, we don't have to worry because there's often this idea of like, well, we've got to get everyone on board. We have to get everyone to believe that climate change is real and humans are behind it. And
Hmm.
and I notice this on like online conversations whenever, there is some kind of, climate change discussion. There are people that are like, no, it's not happening. This is all blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you know what? Your opinion is meaningless. Doesn't matter.
Hmm.
We don't have to change their minds.
Right.
What we
Right.
need to do is get that 3%
Hmm.
active.
Yeah.
And that activity begins with ourselves, where we say, okay, what can I do? How can I
Hmm.
connect with others? And where can we go from there?
Right. Right.
Yeah, and we were talking about this a little while at the restaurant the other day. Um, that when I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought again. I apologize. Um, go ahead. Go ahead. Someone else speak.
Mhm.
I can't remember what
Right.
I was going to say.
So in a way, this comes back to dichotomy again. This whole
Yeah.
idea is I don't feel hopeful,
Yeah.
but that's an internal thing. But can you act hopeful?
Oh,
Body
yeah, yeah.
versus heart.
Yeah, this is what I was
Or
going to say. It was that moral courage, right?
yeah,
To go
yeah.
forward, whether or not you thought it would work out in the end.
Yeah.
Right.
No one knows anything about what's going to happen.
Right.
When we're faced with something this monumental, you know,
Hmm.
we don't know what's going to happen. The people during World War II, didn't know what was going to happen, who was going to win. That's okay. It's about
Hmm.
moving forward
Right.
with moral
Right.
courage. Just do
Right.
the right thing, you
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
know. And if the rest of the world doesn't follow, well, that doesn't mean you're off the hook. Everyone has to keep doing that
Right.
and not be tied to the outcome.
Right. Right.
And that's, something that I think a lot of people through one of the groups I follow, Deep Adaptation, are working through. That we're not tied to the outcome. We might lose. We might lose the whole shebang, but it doesn't. We're not off the hook for that.
Right.
Yeah. I think that the other thing that I would add is that, our society tends to be very isolating.
Hmm.
And
Right.
when we are faced with all of this, it seems overwhelming and we don't know
Hmm.
where to go. And it seems like our own individual actions have no import at all.
Hmm.
And, Stephanie, you've already mentioned, the late, great Terence McKenna, the idea of the archaic revival, and I agree with
Mm-hmm.
that. But I also want to throw in a little bit of Timothy Leary here. Find the others.
Hmm. Right.
There are
Mm-hmm.
people who are doing work. And I think that's something to keep in mind because it seems overwhelming, but there's over like 2 million worldwide, well over 2 million organizations that are working to try to resolve this problem.
Right.
I
And
also think it's important that it is overwhelming and it is sad. It is deeply sad what is happening.
hmm.
So take the time to grieve.
Yes.
You know, take the time to let it out, to grieve, to say, we're going to lose something because we are. You know,
Yep.
we already have, 1.5 degrees Celsius built into the warming, and that's
Mhm.
optimistic. That is highly
Right.
optimistic. More
Right.
likely, it's somewhere around 2.5, 2.7 baked
Hmm.
in.
Oh,
We're going to lose a lot.
Yep.
We're already at 1.2, and look at what's happening around us. So when you see this and you're overwhelmed, honor it. You
Yeah.
know, honor that grief and feel it and go through it, because once you go through it, you can move through it and on to action,
Right.
directed
Right.
action. Mm.
yeah. Yeah, and that's actually maybe a good place to end. We're kind of out of
Mm.
time, but end on a little bit of hope. And even in a
Oh,
hopeless situation, we still have the capacity to act.
right.
All right.
What kind of person are you?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, what do you value?
Hmm.
This is a question
Mm.
that I always end a lot of my philosophy classes with, and I have to say that I get this from my former advisor, Dr. Elizabeth Allison, but I modify it a little bit. But the questions are that every one of us should consider on a daily basis: what do we value?
Hmm. Hmm.
And this is where I add, what kind of person do you want to be?
Yep. Yep.
And then the next question is, what do you do that is supportive of your
Hmm.
values and the kind of
Hmm.
person you want to be? The next question is, what do you do that is destructive of your
Hmm.
values and the kind of person that you want to be? And the final question is, what are you doing to change that?
Right. Right.
So it requires self-examination.
Hmm.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see.
Hmm.
So anyway, I think we
So,
are at the end of our time.
right.
We could
Quick
go
question.
on.
What are we doing next time?
Zombies.
Yes.
Zombie apocalypse.
Yes, yes.
Oh,
So
by the way, like and subscribe.
yes,
Yeah.
like and subscribe. Uh,
Share.
yeah, and share.
Share.
And please go to Jeremy's Kill Devil YouTube
Hmm.
channel. That'll also be down in the comment section link. And we do this on the second Saturday of every month at noon Mountain Time. So the next time it'll be a little bit of a lighter conversation. Um, I think maybe I don't know,
We'll
zombie
see.
apocalypse.
Right. And the
Yeah.
drink will be stronger.
Woo! Thank you. Um,
Okay.
it's gonna be
All
a
right.
zombie.
Thank you, everyone.
Is it gonna be a zombie? Is that the drink?
It is. It is.
All right. I'm out. So cheers.
Cheers.